Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Chupka. I'm the Vice President for Research and Programs here at the Energy Storage Association. Thank you for attending today's webinar on long-duration storage titled Keep It Going, the Growing Market for Long-Duration Storage. This webinar is being recorded. Everyone who registered will also receive a link to the recording and slides within the next couple of days. Questions can be submitted at any time via the questions chat box in your browser, and we'll get to those after our speakers finish their presentations. In the text of your question, please indicate to whom you would like your question addressed. All meetings and teleconferences of the Energy Storage Association are held in accordance with our antitrust guidelines. We ask that you abide by these guidelines during today's webinar. The full guidelines are available in the members area of the ESA website. If you are not already an ESA member and would like information, you can reach out to my colleague Brenda Lovell. Membership includes free access to all of our webinars, including many that are exclusively for members, among numerous other benefits. Please contact Brenda for more information. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you to save the date for the ESA annual conference, which will be held on December 1st through the 3rd in Phoenix, Arizona. It will be great to see everyone again in person. Today, we are exploring a key element to the future of energy storage, the need for long-duration energy storage. Long duration is exemplified by the ads you may have seen on TV with a fuzzy pink bunny banging a drum, which according to the ad keeps going and going because of the large energy capacity of the battery. Another common measure of energy capacity is the driving range for an electric vehicle. In the stationary storage market that we'll examine today, duration is measured in hours as the ratio of the energy capacity to the instantaneous power capability of the battery. Lithium-ion batteries in the 1 to 4 hour range dominate the market now, but the decarbonized grid will need 8 to 12 hour durations and eventually durations measured in days or even weeks. I'm delighted to introduce a great panel for today's discussion. First up will be Wesley Cole, a researcher in the Strategic Energy Analysis Center at the National Renewable Energy Lab. Wesley and his colleagues at NREL have been analyzing the value of and the demand for long-duration storage across a range of scenarios. Wesley will share some of the insights into these markets that the NREL team has developed. Sal Monopoly will be next. He is the Vice President of Operations at Largo Clean Energy. Sal will provide his take on the market for long-duration storage and how Largo's Vanadium redox flow battery technology competes and fits into that market outlook. Our final presenter is John Norman, who is the president of hydrostore, which has developed a different long-duration storage solution and advanced compressed air energy storage technology. John will share his thoughts on long-duration energy storage market outlook and the role that advanced compressed air technology can play in that expanding market. After their remarks, we'll open up to audience Q&A. You can ask questions via the chat box at any time, and we'll read those out for the presenters when we get to the Q&A session at the end. Now I'll turn it over to Wesley.
Great, thanks, Mark. Good to be able to talk with you all today. This is fun. I love talking about storage. We've spent a lot more time here in the past, and it's a fun space. So let's go ahead and get started here. So energy storage has been something that people have been talking about for a long time. We already have 23 gigawatts of pumped hydro storage in the United States, so this isn't a new thing. But the idea of having low-cost energy storage has been a big thing. So you search storage in Holy Grail. I did that, 3.5 million hits on that. The idea that low-cost storage and problem solve life is so much better. And even as looking back through things, I came across this book, which was really fun. Energy Storage, a Vital Element in Mankind's Quest for Survival and Progress, is published in 1980. The idea that energy storage is a vital part of our survival. Like if we don't have energy storage, we're not gonna be able to progress and survive. But this has been around for a long time as a thing that if we could just make this happen, everything's better. And for a long time at NREL, a National Renewable Energy Lab, where we study renewable energy on the grid, we've spent a long time saying, yes, if your power system needs to be flexible, storage is a way to get flexibility, but there's so many other ways to get flexibility. So this is a chart from a 2014 report that said, here's a whole bunch of different ways you can get flexibility, and we categorize them by cost. You could see that storage was on the far right of this. there was, the most expensive type of intervention you could do to get flexibility. There were a lot of cheaper things, increase your dispatch, build transmission, or get better forecasting of variable renewable generation. So there's a lot of things you could do, and we said do all this other stuff first and then do storage, because storage is too expensive. And because people kept saying you need storage for renewables, and we said no, you could get a lot of renewables without storage. And then this thing happened where battery pack prices dropped by 90% with projections to continue to decline. You've seen advances in other technologies besides batteries, that storage is becoming a much more viable technology. It's not kind of the thing you do at the end once you've exhausted other options. Storage is moving more into a mainstream of something you do just because it's cost effective and cheap. And that's changed how people approach renewable energy integration in the power system. It's been really fun to see this change and see things evolve. So when we're talking about storage, you'll hear, if somebody just says energy storage, there's so many types of energy storage, you can't just categorize it like that. So we're talking about duration, like Mark was saying in the intro there. Long duration has typically come to mean 4 hours or longer. That's come largely from this table at the right, where different market operators establish the duration that you need to receive full capacity credit in their capacity market, or their capacity rating, or resource adequacy markets. And 4 hours, you can see, is kind of where things have been moving to. It's not exclusively 4, but that's typical of what's defined as here's how much you need to serve as a firm capacity resource in our grid system. Some people also categorize these as seasonal. Sometimes long duration is seasonal is a subcategory of long duration. Sometimes those are separate. Seasonal is typically the kind of weeks to months, maybe days, depending on how you want to categorize it. And then other people talk about these as, we'll have short duration storage, we'll have diurnal storage, and we'll have seasonal, and they categorize them that way rather than the long short. So you hear different things out there. So when you're talking with people about storage, one, you want to just make sure you understand what people mean when they're talking about duration. Second piece is what the power and energy components mean. So I have 4 different types of energy storage systems. There's more than these 4, but these were just 4 I have nice pictures for. And you can see the energy pieces here in the yellow, the power pieces in the red, and the energy and power pieces are different for the different storage types. So in a pumped hydro storage system, the size of your reservoir drives your energy capacity, your number of hours of storage, versus with a battery plant, it's number of battery modules. So when you're talking about energy and how much, what your duration is and what the long duration, what counts as your long duration storage, it's going to be different based on the type of storage system you're looking at. And the way you add more power versus more energy is going to change based on the type of storage system you have. So this also makes storage really interesting, because the cost of adding power versus capacity is different in each type of storage system. It makes different types of storage be able to contribute to the grid in different ways. Next piece I just want to highlight here was, people often are asking about what are current costs and projected costs for batteries, because that's kind of the technology of today. Whether or not it's, how far out it's going to take us is an open question. But we just put out a report on this, so I just want to throw these numbers out there and just highlight one that, again, when people are talking about costs, I've left dollars per kilowatt on the right, dollars per kilowatt hour as a function of duration. Again, the duration is huge when you're talking about cost. If somebody says my battery system is $400 a kilowatt, or a kilowatt hour, that doesn't mean anything unless you know what the duration is. You need to know what that system is for. The other thing I want to highlight is just that the battery is still a huge part of the system cost. So when you're looking at how much does it cost to install a battery system, the battery is still the largest single chunk of that. So even though battery costs have come down a lot, that's still where most of the cost goes for these systems. Second piece here is just looking out into the future about how these costs might change. We just did a literature review where we said, what are people projecting for the cost of battery storage out to the future? And all the gray lines on here are what you see for how much cost declines people are seeing in 4-hour batteries. So by 2030, we're looking at another 20 to 60% cost reduction of these battery systems. So still a lot of potential for these costs to come down. So it's a pretty exciting thing for the battery space in terms of a lower cost storage option out there to supplement the variable renewables that are going onto the grid. So I want to shift here to talking about how we see the storage getting deployed and how it kind of evolve, how storage deployment might evolve out into the future. So this is kind of a conceptual framework for how we're thinking about storage deployment in the United States. So we already have a lot of storage out there. So we've got the 23 gigawatts of pumped hydro. That's in this 8 to 12 hour range for most of it. It does vary in its duration. So this is, and it's used for a lot of different things. That was built quite a while ago. It's been a long time since a new pumped storage facility has been built. So that's, stuff that's already there. Then phase one, the first phase of storage deployment's been the stuff that's already been happening over the last decade or so, where we're looking at operating reserves, providing short duration batteries that are primarily doing short duration services. Those have been happening. That market's pretty shallow. There's less than 30 gigawatts for all of these reserves across the whole country. So even if storage provided all of those, you'd see less than 30 gigawatts of deployment. And it's unlikely storage would be the exclusive provider of operating reserves, given the amount of capacity that already participates in those markets. So then the next, the big market that really gets a lot of people excited is this peaking capacity market, where you're deploying storage to serve as a peaking plant. These would be in the 2 to 6 hour range, more on in a 4 to 6 hour for more of those where you need to ride through an afternoon or evening peak with a storage device. And so there's a lot of potential for that. It's strongly linked to PV. We'll explain how that works, but up to 100 gigawatts of potential there. And the next phase we see is this, you've saturated your peaking potential. So all these peaking plants have been deployed, and now your primary value stream is shift from providing firm capacity to providing energy. And that's our phase 3 portion, where you're now shifting energy from the middle of the day into the evenings, or just doing these kind of daily shifts. That's storage on the 4 to 12 hour range. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. And then the last piece is this multi-day or seasonal storage, where now you're not just shifting, from middle of the day to evening. Now you're shifting from 1 week to the next week, or from 1 month to the next month. So you're shifting longer periods. You have to have lower costs. You have to have lower cost energy components. Like this is not going to be a lithium ion piece just because the battery packs are expensive. It take a lot of battery packs to do this. And this one is unclear what its potential is. A lot of it depends on how far you want to decarbonize the grid, how much renewables you want to put on the system, and how cheap it could get. Those two pieces will drive its potential. So I just want to talk about a couple of these pieces real quick, and then we'll hand it over to the next folks. So talking about this peaking power plant potential. So you have, here's the load shape in California. The blue line is when you have no storage. The orange line is after you've added some 4-hour storage. So after you added, 3,000 to 4,000 gigawatts of megawatts of 4-hour storage, your peak is now flat and it's longer than 4 hours. You can't put another 4-hour device on the system and be able to serve that peak because it's now too wide. So it's, this is something that people looking at, they know that you're going to eventually saturate these shorter long duration, the 4-ish hour range. But it also changes with the amount of renewables you put on the system. So as the amount, especially of PV you put on the system, it changes the load shape. So on this figure, this is again for California, you have a load shape with 0% PV, and then with 5 and 10, 15, and 20% PV. And you can see that as you add more PV to the system, it initially lowers the peak load, and then your peak shifts to the evening, or you don't have any solar, but PV continues to eat into the left side of the peak. So that narrows your peak period and allows you to deploy more 4-ish hour duration storage to ride through that peak period. So when you translate this to potential for 4-hour storage, it looks something like this on the right. So initially you flatten the peak, so your 4-hour potential drops, and then as you add more PV, then your 4-hour potential increases, and you could double or triple your 4-hour potential for serving as a peaking resource. And this is really important because, at least in the analysis we've done, we see that this being able to be a peaking resource is the the most significant value stream for storage technologies in terms of driving revenue for their plants. So then, when you start looking, we looked at 4 hours. You could do the same thing. This is now nationally instead of just for California. The potential to have high capacity credit or firm capacity storage resources at 6 hours and 12 hours is shown here. Again, a function of PV penetration. So at low PV penetration, 40 to 80 gigawatts of storage capacity you could use as peaking plants, and then you start to deploy a lot of PV up here at 25%, then you're 100 to 160 gigawatts of peaking potential for diurnal storage. So PV is a big driver here, but also in terms of how far you could get with this diurnal storage before you need to start moving to seasonal. And so when we start doing our modeling work and look at all these different pieces and how they play out, we get things that look like this, where we see, to the left here is a reference case, storage deployment in our reference case. So you have your pumped hydro already on the system. You start building shorter duration storage, so 2 hour here on the bottom, and then 4 hour storage starts getting deployed. And then once that's saturated, you'll start getting more 6 hour storage. The 4 hour continues to grow just in different parts of the country. And as the PV shrinks peaks, and then as you start to saturate things, you'll get more 6 hour storage and even some 8 and 10 hour storage out in later years. So we see that kind of evolution of storage durations over time. As you start to saturate the shorter durations, you move to longer and longer durations. And then on the right, our reference scenario, this one on the left translates to the black line on the right. We have a whole bunch of different kinds of sensitivities. What happens if gas prices are higher or wind prices are lower, or all these different kinds of things that could drive how the grid might evolve, and low and high battery costs and how that might change storage deployment. And across all scenarios, we see lots of storage coming online. The rate that it comes online and when it starts to deploy quickly changes. But over the next few decades, we see huge potential for storage to play a role in the U.S. power system. And then last thing I want to highlight is just that this is all talking about the diurnal piece. Once you start going to really high penetrations of renewables, you start needing more than diurnal. So here we've plotted for 4 different regions what renewable energy looks like when we've built out to 95% renewables for the system. So for example, in this top left plot, California has 95% renewable energy, 38% PV, 19% wind, 20% hydro. And how much load is left to meet? What's your deficit from the renewables for meeting load? You could see these chunks here where there's still load left to meet, and then these periods here where there's excess renewables. And you don't need this daily thing. There aren't, you have a single day here where you could, deploy diurnal storage to mitigate that. But otherwise, you have these large, these long time periods where you need to serve load. So you need something that's going to be able to discharge for longer periods of time, and not just for, 4 or 6 or 8 or 12 hours. So once you start getting these really high renewable energy penetrations, you need these longer durations. You need to move to these multi-day seasonal things. And this is an active area of research. There's a lot going on here to try and understand what's going on. So this is all really fun work. Been enjoyed being involved in this. And I'll just close up there. It's pretty quick, but just if you have questions about any of these things, feel free to follow up either to Q&A or my emails here. You're welcome to shoot me a note. Always happy to chat about these things. So I'll go ahead and end there and pass it over to our next presenter.
Hi, I'm Sal Monopoly. Warm welcome from Boston. Excited to be on this panel. I'm very passionate about the long duration energy storage space. I'm looking forward to, especially at the end of this discussion, to have some very good candid discussions. I'm the Vice President of Operation for Largo and head of the energy business. What I'm going to do, I'm going to try to make up some time. Wesley had a lot of good information, but I really do want to try to save some time for the panel discussion. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of Largo and the market and how our technology plays into that market. Largo is a vertically integrated company. we're the the world leader in the supply of high purity vanadium, and we also own a state-of-the-art vanadium redox flow battery technology. We're traded on NASDAQ and the Canadian Stock Exchange under the LGO ticker. We're founded in 2007, large company, over 400 people, headquartered in Toronto. We have mining operations in Brazil, and our energy division is in Boston, including our manufacturing. The energy division is filled with a lot of experience. We have over 200 years of collective experience in the business. The business strategy is not only to provide the technology, but we also provide the full EPC for our technology. We do joint project development, and we provide LTSAs for all our projects. As I mentioned, we have manufacturing that also resides in Massachusetts, and we have a global sourcing capabilities. So here's how we see the market. I think this lines up well with what Wesley showed. We see it right now for long duration energy storage. We see it a bit of a horseshoe. This is really where we're seeing the activity today. And of course, as Wesley mentioned, this is going to change quite a bit. There's going to be a lot of growth in other areas. On the West Coast, clearly California is leading the way. We're seeing a lot of attention. And on the East Coast, because of the state legislations in Virginia, that's really the most increased activities in Virginia for long duration storage. So what's creating this activity? It's been primarily the deployment of the intermittent renewables, retirement of fossil generation, and legislation. I think we all know this slide. We got intermittent renewables, they feed the grid, and we see that long duration energy storage is going to be absolutely critical to getting to the carbon-free grid. As you guys all know, as you have more renewables, the volatility increases, and the energy storage, longer energy storage, is going to be needed to manage that volatility. And we'll be able to get a lot more benefits as well, arbitrage, grid reinforcement, and as well as the capacity and load shifting. Economics for long duration storage. What I wanted to show you here is, traditionally the lithium ion has been the big giant in the energy storage. It's done a great job for below 4 hour applications, and the pricing's been very competitive, but it's just not competitive as you get into more duration. And on the far right corner, you can see how the flow batteries, which is the green curve, beats out the lithium ion at 8 hours and above. Pumped hydro, compressed air, all good technologies, but their curves just don't get to the flow batteries. I think the encouraging thing for me is I see our curves continuing to go down as we put in our cost reduction strategies on technology and sourcing. This slide really shows you how our vanadium flow battery compares to the lithium ion, which we show as conventional. Obviously it's safer, lower cost of storage for applications over 8 hours. It does not degrade, so its life cycle is much better than the conventional applications, and it has a very high energy density. I mean, clearly lithium ion has very good efficiencies and a better energy density, but you can see the 78% is pretty good. So if you couple the round trip efficiency with cost of storage, it just makes it a better investment when you're talking for the longer duration applications. So just quickly, I mean, the thing about our technology, it's not very complex. It's a It's a flow battery with the vanadium chemistry. I think the important thing of this slide is that this technology has been developed for over 10 years, and it has 3 commercial deployments. So it's been tried and proven out there in the field. One of the deployments is actually in a hybrid configuration with solar. The technology is very flexible, so it can really serve all the use cases: capacity replacement, energy shift, transmission, frequency reg, and ancillary services. The last bullet is something my sales guy wanted to make sure I told you, is that it's safer, lower cost, higher energy density, fast responding, easy to deploy. But I think the most important thing is the vanadium flow battery just does not degrade. So if you have a performa of a 30-year life or a PPA of over 20 years, this is really a good investment. So our deployment really also is very simple. It's to be fast while mitigating costs and schedule. We are a vertically integrated company, so because we supply our own raw material, which is the vanadium, we have certainty on cost and supply of the vanadium. The strategy for us is to have fewer entities touching our products. So we have our own manufacturing capability where we make the stack container, the stack containers, the electrolyte containers. So we make that all in-house, ship it to the field. We also have mobile portable systems so that depending on the location, we can just make the electrolyte right there on site. We have a global supply chain where we have strategic agreements with global suppliers. This will be key for us to continue our cost improvements. We have full EPC capabilities, and as I mentioned before, we provide a long-term supply agreement for all our projects. I'm going to turn it to the next presenter.
Thanks, Sal. Appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to try and speed things along as well, just because it would be great to get to questions. And one thing I want to try and do is I won't dwell on the technology too much up front. I would like to talk a little bit more about the long duration market and how we're looking at it. And then I'll go into a little bit where we see advanced case fitting in that I'll talk to you more about. And then I'll explain a bit about the technology, but we can also take some of that offline if you guys have more questions. I think the snapshot of us for hydrostore is we really focus on compressed air as our storage medium, but we take a different approach to it. So key thing to understand is that unlike traditional compressed air, we don't use any natural gas as a fuel source. We just take heat internal to our process and we inject that into the turbine when we're generating. So we are effectively like a true storage asset. There's no gas burn at all or emissions. And then the other key thing is that we can be flexibly sited. So we purpose build our systems in hard rock. We're generally larger scale as a result to be cost competitive. And we have a number of applications that are already built out and contracted to grid operators, and then others that are in advanced development right now in our jurisdictions of focus. So it sort of makes us effectively kind of like a pumped hydro asset with similar synchronous generation, but with the advantage of being able to be flexibly sited. And I'll go through a little bit what some of the trade-offs are between different technologies. I think both Wesley and Sal were doing a good job of explaining that too, so I'll give you my perspective on it. So we are based here in Toronto. We have some satellite offices in California and Australia where we have projects underway. We're a team of about 30 people right now, mostly on the engineering and commercial development side, but that's rapidly growing also. We have a couple of operating facilities. One was a pilot plant, another is a commercial application with the grid operator here in Ontario. And we have actually a couple of thousand megawatts of projects that are commercially bid right now, where we're really focused at this point is North America, Australia, and Chile, just given the long duration market characteristics. And as an example, we've been selected as a preferred transmission alternative by the largest Australian utility just recently, which we're obviously very excited about as a company. Just to go into the market a little bit, I won't dwell on this. You guys have seen this. Wesley described this well. There's a lot of need for utility scale storage, and it's growing massively. That's why we're all here. I think the point is, often when we talk about storage, until recently, it's been sort of just lumped together as an overall concept. Obviously, now we're really talking about duration. And long duration, what we're finding is it really is becoming a critical part of the mix now. Lots of it is already starting to be commercially developed. And if you look at, this is just a snapshot from the DOE on just case technologies and the addressable market for it over the next 10 years. You're already looking at about 350 gigawatt hours of applications just that would be suited to case and including advanced case. So, we see a lot of market potential, and you'll see a little bit more where we fit in as I describe the market a bit. So I'm actually going to skip down a sec because this slide might be a little bit out of order. I just want to explain, where we see the value proposition near term for long duration storage. You obviously hear a lot about renewable energy integration, and I think that is an important driver. Usually when we're going into markets, we're looking at ones that do have high renewable penetration or growth in renewables, because obviously the ability to shift that into area like, periods dealing with the duck curve and actually dealing with periods of peak requires really more than 4 hours of storage to do that properly. But what we see as a real near-term market opportunity is more on the locatable capacity side of things. There's a lot of fossil plants that are retiring, and a lot of transmission that's required. And when you have a long duration resource, that can actually fill that need directly. And this is where Wesley's presentation was excellent. A few points that we may view a little bit differently. We look at the definition of long duration storage really more as 8 hours plus. And there's a good reason for that. I think it goes to the point of that's typically what's required to be effective capacity. I realize that the ISOs have set minimum requirements around 4 hours, but even those same ISOs are adopting, for example, an equivalent load carrying capacity construct or constructs where there are buckets that recognize the additional value that long duration storage can provide and how important that is. And that recognition, I think, is only growing over time. There's been lots of studies done as well that show really to reliably replace a fossil plant, or indeed many types of transmission assets, you need 8 to 10 hours of storage, which is why PJM actually initially came out and said they need a minimum of 10 hours, although they're migrating to an ELCC construct now as well. So the reason I mention that is when we look at our pipeline, we really are looking at near-term opportunities that were related to transmission deferral and fossil plant replacement, where we can put in, a couple 100 megawatt plant and directly replace these things. So, well, I was just going to go back a slide. Oh, sorry, there seems to be a bit of a delay there. I won't dwell on this either, but I think it's worth noting that there are some barriers that are being addressed right now, and we've seen big changes in this over the past couple of years. So storage increasingly is being looked at as a transmission alternative. California, they've toyed with that. We've been in a process there. Australia, they're actually doing that. And in a lot of other places, they've actually put out RFOs for, just alternatives to transmission that are typically storage. So the ability to qualify as this regulated asset and then operate as both a market and network asset is proving to be really important. Chile's taking steps on that. Australia is taking steps on that. I think FERC is starting to get there, but there's more work that's required. So, we'd be happy to talk about that a bit as well with the broader industry. Other regulatory barriers that are sometimes in place is just making sure that network charges aren't applied to the load side of storage, right? Seems pretty basic. A lot of jurisdictions have already addressed that, including Australia, California, Ontario, but it's not always the case, and it can be a problem for projects. So it's just another area of focus going forward also. And I do think also procurement pathways are important in the near term. Part of the reason for that is when I was talking about 8-hour storage actually really being required, even if the grid operator is putting minimum requirements in for capacity, what we're finding, capacity qualification, what we're finding is the planning authorities, for example, like in California, they've gone out and said, well, actually, independent of that, we need 1,000 to 1,600 megawatts of 8-hour plus storage by mid-decade, because they need that to replace retiring conventional capacity. So the planners are actually already ahead of the curve and saying they do need 8-hour storage. We've seen that in New South Wales. We've seen that in California. We're increasingly seeing that in places like Ontario, and even some of the jurisdictions that Sal pointed out on his map as well. And again, it's being driven by this locatable capacity requirement. So California is just sort of an interesting example I put in here as context. There's obviously lots of others, and we think it's actually quite informative. California is very close to releasing additional procurements for 8-hour plus storage, which is part of the reason why we're actually quite busy there. So, this is my own stab at kind of comparing some long duration solutions. I mean, this isn't comprehensive, but, a few key points I would say, looking from even the advanced case perspective. One point I would make is, are often compared to lithium ion batteries, but I don't really see us as competing with that. I think lithium ion batteries are synergistic with us. I think they work really well at fast responding and shorter duration applications. And they're high efficiency before their performance degradation kicks in. So these are all advantageous. But the reality is, for long duration applications, 6, 8, 10 hours plus, they just aren't cost effective. And even with the cost declines that Wesley was showing up front, I'd be happy to talk to folks, after or during the Q&A about just some of the drivers that show that, like, even out to 2030, you're still, for an 8-hour or 10-hour application, a hydrostore advanced case asset, and maybe some other technologies as well that are more mechanical or even flow batteries, would be cheaper than that for those applications. So it's a good mix. You can see the trade-off with advanced cases. We just have a lower efficiency. We're typically between 60 and 65%. But what we find is it kind of makes us like a pumped hydro asset that can be flexibly sited, so very valuable to provide capacity. It's really just a slight increase in operating costs. And the trade-off is, yeah, pumped hydro's efficiency would be higher, but that what we're finding is, for the applications that we're quite busy on right now, that difference is not actually that critical to the overall economics. In fact, the ability to site this where it's required is the most critical. I won't dwell on flow batteries. I think Sal explained that really well and probably has a better handle on the costs. Where we come from with advanced cases, we do well in areas where we can have scale. We have similar cost declines with duration as what Sal was showing on flow batteries as well. And so where you really can't permit gas, or there's high cost gas markets, and there's already a requirement for longer duration storage, this plays really, really well in an area where you're going to be $100 to $200 per kilowatt hour deployed at these scales. So I'm going to just go through this really, really quickly, probably just spend a minute really on it. I won't dwell on compressed air energy storage, just to maybe to point out that our platform is really built on the same platform as CASE, which has been proven for the past 40 years on utility scale plants. So we've just addressed it by getting rid of the emissions and being able to flexibly site. Happy to talk to folks after about how we do this, but effectively we're building a cavity underground, and we have a small water reservoir that's about 20 times less volume than an equivalent pumped hydro facility, and we're cycling that water back and forth with the air as it's getting compressed into the chamber. So I'm happy to share a video with you guys that explain that a bit more if anyone's interested. But that's key to us being energy dense enough that we can actually flexibly build this where it's required on the grid. Incidentally, that's the difference between us and pumped hydro. We're using the same water head, we're just not running it directly through a turbine. So our efficiency is slightly lower, but the compressed air that we're basically taking that water head and transferring it into air pressure, is so much more space efficient that that's what allows us to build these cavities out cost effectively. I won't dwell on the process, but needless to say, we're just taking heat from our compression process and we're storing that, putting it into our expanders. So that's what allows us to be emissions free. And on delivery, I would also point out that often when we're talking about long duration storage, we kind of treat it as this theoretical, okay, it's a bit longer term, these are all pre-commercial. But the reality is what we're doing is really just building on existing supply chains that are already provided at scale for the same applications. And there's really only three main subsystems for us: the thermal storage, the turbo machinery, and the subsurface cavern construction, which is all off the shelf and has thousands of precedents. So we've already lined up performance guarantees. We also have LTSAs. We have additional construction bonding already available. And that's what allows us to have lined up these global delivery relationships, whereby we're already in processes right now across the world. Some of them very advanced commercial processes. We're in negotiations in California. We've been selected as a preferred wires alternative in Australia, as I mentioned. And we're entering into advanced development on about 12 to 14 other opportunities globally. Typically, these are all in the multi-hundred megawatt scale where we're very cost effective. So this is how we're sort of seeing the market going forward. Happy to talk about some of our specific applications if anyone's interested, and really looking forward to the Q&A. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, John and Sal and Wesley. That was really, really good. We do have some questions. Apparently these were fairly provocative presentations. I'm going to start with a quick one to Wesley. On your slide 19, there was a diagram of the differences in reference case outcomes for different type for durations. And there's there was sensitivities that showed a big digression, a big diversion between 2030 and 2035. And what's causing that? Is it just is it renewable penetration? I think that's you were using the same reference case. So was it just costs as you showed there, or what were the other factors that provided such divergence?
Oh, that's a good question. And there's a lot of factors, not just one thing. So you'll have growing renewable energy shares over time. So that's one factor. Costs evolve over time, get lower. That's another factor. Another factor, I don't know if you pay attention to any capacity markets, you've seen that the capacity prices have been low. There's generally, in most market regions, there's an oversupply of capacity, which pushes down near-term prices. So so the size of opportunity grows in our modeling as our model shows those tightening up. That's partly just how the model works, is it doesn't like having overcapacity in any region, so it tries to balance that out. So I think it's those combination of pieces all factor in to provide some of that divergence there that you saw.
And Mark, maybe the only comment I would add, I don't recall slide 19 specifically, but when we're looking at the rollout and timing that NREL had modeled on long duration storage, one thought that crossed my mind was they really were looking at battery energy storage costs. So we've had our own assessments done and done that with independent consultants and worked with other folks who show a much earlier adoption timeframe for long duration storage when you account for the actual costs of things like compressed air energy storage or alternative pathways that are actually cheaper for long duration than batteries.
All right, here's a question that's addressed to both Sal and John. And Sal, I'll ask you to address this first. How are your companies addressing the financial reluctance of developers or utilities in adopting your technology? For example, warranties, bankability, et cetera. Sal, can you
Sal, do you want to go ahead?
You're on mute, I think, Sal.
Yeah, I finished half my answer and I just realized I was on mute. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, we're in a bit of a unique position being Largo because of the size of company we are and what we can bring to the table in terms of either parent guarantees or investment into projects. I've had some of those. I've had some of those kind of situations to deal with. Not much with the vertically integrated utilities. Obviously, more so with the developers. But it's never been an issue to move forward on the project because if there is, for example, a bankability issue where it's going to delay a project, that's when we would step in and be partners into the project and basically put skin in the game. So flow batteries is also a lot better than other technologies that I know of really well because they are essentially proven technologies. They're not really considered emerging technologies. So I haven't had any issue with Largo's flow batteries where it slowed up or caused any sort of risk to development of a project. But it is something you need to identify early in any project is the effects of bankability of the technology.
Yeah, and I guess I would add from hydrostore's perspective, I mean, we have the advantageous position, I guess, of like our entire business model has been built around not having this off lab work or lab experiments. We've just taken off the shelf stuff and actually integrated that together intentionally and then built out plants that are utility scale that demonstrate the operational performance. And then the delivery pathway doesn't require any commercial scale up. So it already exists at scale. So what we've been able to line up is performance guarantees and additional construction bonding that I mentioned. These aren't small facilities. These are $250 million facilities that really provide, typically it's the utility that cares the most about that, because we either have projects that are direct sale to utilities where they want to own it outright, and then the performance guarantees are very helpful, or we work with developers, some of whom is showing on that slide. And what we find with the developers providing equity on the project is they don't even need the performance guarantees. They don't want to pay the extra cost for it. And they're actually quite comfortable with the technology and the delivery pathway. So they've actually requested to not have it in there. But that's been our experience. We do find, as you point out, Mark, that utilities are a bit more risk averse, which is why we have those facilities set up.
All right, thanks. Here's a question for Sal. Question is, I always hear vanadium has a highly volatile cost. How does the vertically integrated company strategy mitigate that? And what costs are they able to guarantee for vanadium now?
So, repeat the question. I didn't hear the first part. You cut out, Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. The questioner reflects on the fact that vanadium has a highly volatile cost or price. And so how does your vertically integrated strategy mitigate that? And what costs are you quoting now for vanadium to guarantee?
Yeah, well, as far as the price that we're quoting now, I'm glad to talk to whoever asked the question. We can talk about that. I've never like to give those kind of numbers over a webinar. But here's what I will tell you is that our pricing, and I have extensive long duration energy storage experience and deployment. Our costs on a dollar per megawatt hour, I don't see any technology above 8 hours that would beat the vanadium flow battery at above 8 hours. So glad to talk to anyone about that. As far as how the vertical integration helps the business, well, over 50% of the costs, hold on a second, guys. Over 50% of the total costs on a net present value basis is the vanadium. And in the past, that's really what prevented vanadium flow batteries really to deploy at the rate it wanted to. But because we can dictate the cost of vanadium, because we make the vanadium, we deliver the vanadium. I'm a customer to the mines, just like the steel or aerospace industry. That gives us a competitive advantage when we're in a competitive situation. But I think even more important is we can guarantee those prices, and we can guarantee the supply, because it's also it's our inventory, it's our mines. I think the other advantage, because of the vertical integration and the types of warranty we offer, because we offer a 25-year warranty on our technology. Our LTSA is based and because the technology does not degrade, that vanadium is all reusable at the end of life. So we can take back the vanadium, which is part of our LTSA, and reuse it back into other industries if we want, whether it's steel or chemical industry, aerospace, or back into the energy industry. So that gives us kind of this circle of life capability with our vanadium and our energy technology.
All right, thanks, Sal. That was a great answer here. Here's a one for Wesley. It's possible that Sal and John might want to chime in. The question is, are there any market projections for very long-term storage, like 100 hours plus? Many slides mention time frames, but I'm not seeing the projection for markets for anything more than 12 hours.
Yeah. Let me jump in, and then you can take up. Look, I think it's an interesting question. It's something I'm having discussions with the executives at utilities about. I mean, there are some utilities think that they're going to skip the 4 to 12 hour duration and go right over to 50-hour plus. I mean, I don't think there's any projections, any real data to support that, but I mean, there are utilities that are looking at it. I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm definitely staying in tune with the utilities. I don't see how you can just skip it, to be honest. If you look at the way the intermittent renewables are coming in, especially in the East Coast area with the offshore winds, I don't know how you skip from 4 hours all the way to 50 hours. And for sure, that's going to be something that is just not available today or anytime soon. And you might even be talking about hydrogen at that point. But it's definitely, I'm hearing a lot of discussion about it. I don't see any forecasts, any real quantitative data. But yeah, it's definitely an issue people are talking about. John, I mean, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, well, my experience, I think the questioner was actually bang on. What I found is utilities that are actually acting on things are really focused in the 6 to 12 hour range, often around 8. They're focused on long duration. Obviously, there's a lot of 4 hour and less procurement happening as well on lithium-ion batteries. But I have heard utilities say things similar to that, jumping directly to 50 hours. I haven't seen anything that is remotely close to action on that. And one of the things we've tried to do to really facilitate that for utilities, because they're always uncertain, like we're a very long life asset, 30 years plus, easily 50 years with the just maintenance upgrades on the surface. And that means, well, are you locking into this, particular duration? And what we try to provide is just expansion options that are very, very cost effective for the utilities, because our marginal cost of storage is really, really low, as is the case with some other technologies, but not batteries, because you're just going to be banking on cells and cells and cells that basically have the same cost. So, we can expand duration post COD. You can go from 12 hours to 24 hours, for example, And the marginal cost of doing that, or even adding 2 or 4 hours, would be $70 a kilowatt hour post COD. So it gives them optionality. I think they like the idea of that optionality. But I agree, it's tough to. There's a lot of theory around the 50-hour range, but I haven't seen a lot of action on it yet.
Is it just hydrogen then, if we're talking about 50, 100 hours, et cetera? And Wesley, I'm going to send this to you. When you talk about such long durations, does your analysis tend to show that hydrogen is the main player?
I would say
Well,
yeah.
this is now,
Ahead,
you're talking about technologies that don't exist yet. I mean, that's in part, I mean, hydrogen doesn't exist. So it's hard to say hydrogen's going to win in a market that, like, there isn't a market for 100-hour duration storage yet that, like, people are, you can't just go buy that today. So this is very much in the research space where researchers have been arguing about this, but it's still, I mean, I think kind of what John said, like, if you could build an option today and expand it later, you know, that's great. If you end up not wanting 50 hours or something else comes up that's better for 50 hours, great. But there's a lot of unknown here still in terms of what is best and what will win out. So,
but what, Wesley,
I mean, lots of stuff going on though.
Yeah, Wesley, this is Sal. I totally agree with you. The technology doesn't exist, but what the mindset of utility customers is, and I spent most of my career as a utility customer, is that, well, then we can wait and see when that technology does come, and maybe the 0 to 4 hours will be sufficient until that time comes. There's still a debate when that time comes. Is it 15 years? Is it 20 years? If you talk to utilities that are further along in understanding hydrogen, they'll tell you it's closer to 15 to 20 years for reliable hydrogen capacity. But if you talk, hopefully Mitsubishi's on the line. If you talk to them, you know, they're pitching that, hey, buy our gas turbine today, tomorrow it'll burn on hydrogen. I think, you know, that's what's confusing this market is you know, what do they need to do? And many customers get paralyzed and they say, well, let's just wait and see.
Yeah, not to state the obvious, but obviously with hydrogen has a couple of challenges to overcome, right? It needs the distribution infrastructure to exist. So that's all got to be created. And you're either down a path where it's really low round trip efficiency because you're using fuel cells basically as the form of storage, which is not the best process to have a good RTE, like it's really quite low. Or you're burning it, like you said, Sal, and that's fine, that can work. But you got to keep in mind that that's also releasing more NOx than natural gas, which, by the way, is also a greenhouse gas. It may defeat the purpose. So there's some challenges to overcome there too. But as Wesley points out, when's the market coming?
Yeah, it points out that there are trade-offs pretty much everywhere lurking in this space. Here's a question for anybody came in. It's does anyone think that long duration storage will be able to access multiple value streams due to the sheer size of potential installations?
Without a question. I mean,
Well,
without a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the size angle is the
I mean, look, the problem right now, Mark, is not every region is properly valuing all the benefits of long duration. For example, transmission resiliency and deferrals. Some utilities are having a tough time. How do you quantify that? You know, but long duration energy storage does bring a better resilient, a more resilient system. More flexibility. So how do you quantify that? You know, there's certain rules that utilities have to abide by to get projects approved. But they're figuring that out. You know, it wasn't too long ago when California was only looking for 4 hours, and now today, all the RFPs, all the customers realize they need 10 hours of storage. They're realizing they need capacity, they need the load shifting, they need the transmission, they need the frequency reg benefits. So I think eventually it's all going to get there. I mean, it's just a matter of it's a matter of time. It's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think the main barrier to value stacking, like at least in the US, there might be two. Like, we know jurisdictions that are doing the planning, like California, that have renewable penetration, can't build gas plants, like all that kind of stuff. They're saying they do need long duration storage, but FERC hasn't really caught up yet, or the FERC entities, the ISOs, on ensuring ELCC is really accounted for and that long duration is really recognized as being required in capacity. The same ISOs have come out and said, they need 8 to 10 hours, and for political reasons got pushed back to shorter durations, which is fine. I mean, I think it's important as the market grows that this sort of evolves over time. But I think the other big barrier that FERC needs to address through 841 is just transmission and having an asset be able to provide transmission services while also providing services to the ISO markets, the organized markets. Otherwise, you're just, consumers end up paying twice, right, for wires structure plus the storage asset or generation assets, and that just doesn't make sense, right? And so it's a construct that needs to be addressed over time.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've arrived at the end of the hour, and I'd like to thank the presenters for a very informative session and for excellent presentations and some very interesting answers to the questions that have been posed. Before we conclude, I'd like to remind you to save the dates for December 1st through ESA annual conference in Phoenix. So please stay healthy and safe and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye now.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
So.